Hi, and welcome to this Conversation in Conservation Careers session. I'm Darren Johnson, Careers Consultant at Cambridge University Careers Service, and with me today is Cambridge graduate Ellen Miller, who's a Senior Field Ecologist for SLR Consulting. Ellen graduated in 2018 with a degree in Natural Sciences, and before her current role, worked as a graduate ecologist and also completed a number of internships and volunteer positions within the conservation sector. Ellen will start by providing an overview of her career journey to date since graduation. She will then go on to talk about some of the challenges that she faced, not just sourcing, but also funding internship opportunities within the conservation sector, and provide some really good advice around this, particularly in terms of funding sources. Ellen actually secured her first graduate job through a speculative approach to applications and speaks of the benefits of taking this approach to securing job opportunities. And finally, we'll provide some recommendations on where to look for opportunities in her field. So really good to have you with us today, Ellen, and thanks very much for taking time out to join me in this session. My first question to you is, could you please just provide an overview of your career journey since graduating?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Darren. So as Darren mentioned, I graduated in Earth Sciences, and actually my career now is more aligned to ecology and conservation. So if anything, sort of straight after graduating, I had a slight career change before even my first job. But I started off volunteering, actually. I realised that I really liked being outside and in nature. I had a lot of field work in Earth Sciences during my degree, and I knew I enjoyed that. So I volunteered at my local wildlife trust. And then following from that, I managed to get a staff role with an organisation called Operation Wallacea. So they're a wildlife conservation education charity who I'd actually volunteered with during my first and second year of uni in the summer. So I came back as a staff member, and that involved basically leading groups of school children, so students from about 14 to 18, teaching them about rainforest surveys in Borneo. Which was an amazing experience. Yeah, got a lot of contacts and a lot of connections from that. Straight after that, I had an internship, which was 3 months long. It was with the United Nations Environment World Conservation Monitoring Centre. So they're based in Cambridge. And that was a really exciting internship, all based on ecological restoration and looking at it in terms of climate change. So that was, a 3-month research project. After that, I then got a graduate ecologist role at MKA Ecology, which is a small consultancy based in Cambridgeshire. I was there for about 2 years, and then just recently, so for the past 4 months, I moved on to SLR Consulting as a senior field ecologist.
So I'd like to ask how you actually went about applying for the graduate ecologist role at MKA Ecology.
Yeah, of course. So when I was still finishing up my internship at WCMC, I was actually applying to a lot of formally advertised roles, but I was also sending out a lot of speculative applications to organisations that I'd identified, and MK Ecology was one of them. And that actually went forwarded to an interview and then progressed to an offer just from a speculative application. So that was a really great experience actually to get.
Was there anything in particular, when you reflect back on the actual application that you did, that you think you did well, that got you through to sort of an interview stage?
I think it is really commonly said, but I think really tailoring your application to the organisation, even when it's speculative, was really important. So I did a lot of my research. I'd come across the company before in kind of previous job emails, but it was several months before, so when I wasn't looking for a role. So I had heard of them before, and I referenced that in my application. I said, I saw that you were looking for roles a few months ago, but actually I'm looking now. But also I did research on LinkedIn. I looked at their sort of current employees, what kind of work experience they had, to see if I was a good fit. And again, really research their website, and if they had any previous job applications advertised, I would kind of tailor it to that. and go from there. And yeah, I suppose a follow-up email, I would do that to a few speculative applications. If I hadn't had a reply within about a week, I'd send a gentle nudge, or I'd try and contact them on another form, so either email or LinkedIn or a telephone number, and kind of reach out that way.
That's great, thank you. And just on the topic of your initial work experiences that you did, so some of the internships, and I know some of them were sort of voluntary and not paid. Any advice to listeners who are looking at those types of opportunities, struggling for funding in some way or form, based on your own experiences of how you managed that?
Yeah, definitely. I think conservation as a whole can present some difficulties with the requirement to volunteer before getting a permanent paid role. And certainly I managed to sorry. Certainly, I managed to actually secure some funding for some of my work. So for my first volunteering with Operation Wallacea, I got some funding from my college, so a travel grant to do that. And I also contacted a whole range of different organisations. So even my local Lions Club and local Rotary Club from where I grew up actually offered travel grants for young people, and I managed to secure that. So for that and my subsequent fieldwork during the summer holidays, I did manage to get quite a significant amount of funding. So that does involve a lot of research, a lot of background reading, but it's definitely worthwhile so that you're not out of pocket by doing these voluntary experiences.
Great, really good overview there, and really interesting different types of experiences as well. Just really interested to know how important you feel your experiences have been, particularly at UNEP and Operation Wallacea, to getting your job as a graduate ecologist with MKA.
Yeah, definitely. They were really important because in general in the field of sort of conservation, it's really important to have any sort of voluntary or internship experience before trying to secure that permanent or longer term role. I think specifically for ecological consultancy, my past experiences with Operation Wallacea in regards to like fieldwork and safety considerations fed into it well. And for UNEP WCMC, I had completed a large literature review and sort of generated a database, so my ability to collect and gather lots of information and then synthesize it in an overall presentation was another sort of transferable skill for ecology, and I think those helped me secure my first role.
Great. Would you give any advice to any of our listeners listening in today who might be thinking about trying to obtain internships or similar types of work experience?
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of volunteering, I contacted my local wildlife trust. So that was where I actually lived at home rather than at Cambridge, and reached out to them directly. The internship was advertised, so I went through more of a formal application procedure with that. But actually during the internship, I met other people who had managed to get it perhaps more informally through conversations with staff that they had a connection with, or also through, sometimes it was through their professors on their course at Cambridge, also could link them to organisations as opposed to academics for some potential work experience. So it definitely was just reaching out, sending lots of emails and doing networking that way to try and obtain some experience.
Well, thank you, that's really useful. So as a graduate ecologist for MKA Ecology, what were some of your typical daily tasks?
Yeah, so ecological consulting is super varied, and so as a graduate ecologist, my day-to-day jobs are really varied. So a lot of the overall purpose of it is regarding sort of wildlife protection and legal legislation when it comes to sort of protected species. So that would actually involve going out in the field, going and visiting sites and trying to determine whether this wildlife would occur on that site. So one day I'd be checking a pond for great crested newts, the other day I'd be crawling in an attic of a Cambridge college looking for bats, or climbing trees looking for bats and being out and about. So that in terms of the fieldwork, it was really varied. Then we'd also have a desk-based element. So once we'd collected our data in the field, we would then be interpreting it and writing it up, writing reports that will give our recommendations as to whether a certain development should go ahead or the next steps that are needed to try and protect the wildlife that is present. So yeah, a hugely varied role. Most of the field work is undertaken in the summer with a small amount in the winter. So there is a bit of a seasonal divide in the job, which is slightly unusual. So yeah, and again, with bat surveys, right, they're nocturnal species, so we would be out at night time during the summer months as well. So varied in terms of time of day, activities that we're doing, and office and field work.
Great, really interesting. And what would be really interesting to find out, I guess, is how does your role kind of differ now? So the current role that you actually do, how does it differ to your previous role?
Yeah, so I think it was a sort of natural progression that's similar in lots of different roles. So I still get out and about in the field a lot more, but sometimes that will be doing more specialist surveys, such as more detailed habitat surveys. And also it might be going out with more junior members of staff, so other graduate ecologists, and showing them the ropes of a specific survey technique. But I'm still ongoing training in ecology. You never know enough. Everyone's training at all levels. So yeah, still going out, and I'm also working on a slightly different project. So the organisation I work for now is just much larger in terms of it does environmental consulting as a whole. So I'll be helping with the ecology aspects regarding sort of renewable energy projects. And quarries, for example, so larger and slightly different work there. And I'm also working with the public sector. So at the moment I'm working with a council in letting them understand a bit more of the legislation that's coming up with regards to biodiversity net gain. So a really key piece of trying to conserve more of our habitats for the longer term.
And have you had anything unexpected kind of in terms of tasks you've had to do that you weren't kind of expecting, I guess, when you either from when you first joined your first graduate program or your current program that you think might be important for listeners to hear about?
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. I think what struck me was I do use a huge variety of skills, some of which I really didn't expect, and sort of going all across all of the modules that I studied in natural sciences, because I started off very broad, and even going back to A levels. So for some of my work, I'll actually be doing quite detailed calculations, calculating areas and percentage changes. So quite mathsy. Other times I'll be using a lot of geography and GIS knowledge, trying to draw on a map or orient myself in a kind of remote place. So but again, there's more sort of the traditional softer skills as well. So I present to clients on a regular basis, and I present to people with a whole varied range of knowledge and background of ecology, and also a range of opinions. Some people who are very pro-conservation and some people who aren't. So trying to develop those negotiation skills and persuasion skills is also something that's really important. So I do feel like ecologists, yeah, you have a really varied skill set. You have your detailed, being able to learn your species ID of birds, plants, botany, etc., and then also being able to interact with a whole variety of people to communicate your really important results. So yeah, certainly a lot of unexpected and varied tasks. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks ever so much. Really insightful and useful to know. And finally, I guess what kind of final advice would you give listeners today who are kind of interested going into your field of work?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of advice I'd give to people looking to come into ecological consultancy, because when I graduated, I wasn't really hugely aware of what it was, and fell into it, and now I'm enjoying it so much. There are actually things I look back and think, yeah, I could have been involved with that during my degree. So firstly, I think it would be a lot of our fieldwork is based on UK ecology, so UK species, and that isn't often taught on a tripos level, you know, whether you're doing zoology, whether you're doing earth sciences like I did. Identifying your different grasses or your different trees isn't commonly a module, right? So a great thing would be to get out and about, get a pair of binoculars, get some ID guides, go out with friends or volunteering and go bird watching or try and look at your botany and just see. It gives you a good feel about whether you enjoy that sort of aspect as well. So that does lead into, yeah, volunteering. So you would be able to get out with the Wildlife Trust or other similar organisations and either shadow people who are doing these sorts of surveys or get involved with more practical tasks, sort of like tree planting, hedge laying. Those are all things that I enjoyed when I was volunteering. Another key thing that I wanted to add is that an organisation that's really important in the ecology world is CIEM. It's the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. So you can apply to be a student member. And that gives you access to absolutely loads of training talks and training resources. And they've also recently launched a mentoring platform. So you can actually try and identify some potential career goals or some work experience with someone who is well established in this field. So I'd certainly recommend getting involved with that. And another sort of just more practical note, really, nothing to do with experience, but a driving license and access to a car is quite important for this role. So we do a lot of work either in remote places, places that aren't easily accessible by public transport, or we're carrying a lot of equipment. So unfortunately, sometimes public transport just isn't really an option for us. So just practically wise, if you have a driver's license or you're working towards one, and then in the future if you have a car and access to a car, then those are really important things just to bear in mind as well.
That's great. Thank you so much for joining me today, Ellen. And it's been a really interesting overview and insight in terms of not just your career journey, but also insights and advice for students and graduates who are listening in today, who might be very interested in breaking into this. So once again, a big thank you for taking time out of your schedule today.
Yeah, thank you
to join me for this session.
No worries at all. Had a great time. Thanks.